Okay, so continuing on with this concept of the ego from a spiritual and psychological perspective, just to refresh on what we talked about in the definition of it, this is basically a second voice inside of your head that is easiest to be thought of as sort of a screensaver that works when you are not consciously using your mind. This other voice comes on that you listen to, and this other voice is called the ego, and the ego has very specific goals and very specific tactics of what it's trying to do. The ego, just like any other computer program or living being, anything that has some sort of existence, whether sentient as human beings are, or what you find on AI or computer programs or things of that nature, they will strive for their sustainability. Nothing is built to kill itself. Nothing's built to end itself, and so the ego is the same way. Now, thinking about what the ego is exactly is a little, scary or weird. For instance, two ideas of the source of the ego would be the first being that the ego is some sort of program that is maybe genetically encoded into our DNA, that is there to maybe just keep the wheels turning when we're not facilitating conscious use of our what they would call our alpha state, using consciously using our mind. And so when we fall into a daydream or into a regular dream, maybe that's what's coming up is a program that was programmed into us, which is weird in itself. A little scarier notion would be the idea that when you're not using your mind, that your mind is not necessarily you, but it's more like a vehicle or an instrument that can be used by you or anyone else that has access to it. What it takes to have access to it, I don't know, but the idea is that maybe while you're not using your mind, something else does, some sort of spiritual entity, energy, whatever the case may be. Here's what I do know. I don't know the source of it. It's kind of scary to think about. Not that I'm afraid to think about it, but understanding sort of the ontology of it doesn't concern me as much as dealing with it on a daily basis and figuring out how to overcome it, because it is definitely the source of resistance in your life. It is the source of condemnation. It is the source of your inability to sort of rise above the challenges that may be finding in your life, or more importantly, just to be at peace with what you have in your life right now, instead of being in constant turmoil. So the ego, just like anything else that is built, wants to sustain itself and does not want to end itself. And so the ego is constantly trying to make you feel like you need it. And thus it needs to keep you in this state of what would be called psychologically fight or flight. Basically, the ego wants to keep you in a very primal animalistic state where you have no consciousness, meaning you have no capacity to help others, to see a greater cause, to find greater wisdom. When you're in a fight or flight mode, it's you against whatever the danger is, you against the world. That fight or flight mode is very primal. It's a very sustainable instinct where you are looking at only surviving for yourself, and you have no capacity to have strength, love, or any sort of caretaking to be able to care for anything else at that point. Okay, you're in a desperate state, and that's what the ego wants to keep you in, is in this lower chakra, primal, desperate state, fight or flight motion. And it can do that in a modern society with scarcity and food, just like it does with animals. Essentially, this is how animals think. They're constantly in a fight or flight survival mode where they're so scared, so full of fear, so full of understanding and consciousness, that they don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so, I've got kittens here that are pretty feral that I've been feeding, and the more food I put out, the nicer they are to each other. But the less food I put out, the harder they are on each other, the more they swat each other, the brother and sister. It doesn't really matter. If there's a lack of abundance of anything, then there's going to be more ego, there's going to be more fight or flight, there's going to be more self-interest, less consciousness. Okay, again, it's an illusion. The cats don't understand that I have a whole bag of cat food right here for them at any time they want. Okay, they don't know that there's a whole world of food out there because they don't really know how to hunt, and they're new to the game, so they don't know how many trash cans are out there or whatever the case may be. But they will be able to survive, but they don't know that now, so they're very scared. And in the same light, this is what the ego does, but less with food, more with your trigger points. See, the great thing about the ego is it knows your trigger points. It knows how to trigger you better than anyone because it's inside of you. So it knows what you're really concerned about. You know, whether it's about you hate your car, you hate your status in life, you hate your marriage, you hate how people, don't respect you, don't listen to you, don't ask you for advice. All of these things are the type of things that the ego is talking about. And it wants to keep you in that mode of feeling like you have to fix these things before you get anywhere in life or before you go to the next challenge. But as soon as you accomplish that challenge, the ego is going to either tell you haven't accomplished it enough or put the next one in front of you before you can ever get past that state, so that you feel like you never have a capacity to offer anything to the world, that you're always in this survival mode, constantly trying to overcome the criticisms and challenges that the ego is putting in front of you. And again, if you're not aware of this, okay, then you can't do anything about it. But if you are aware of it, if you're what I say vigilant, then as soon as you become conscious of it, it goes away. If I'm driving on the road and it starts coming into my mind and it starts telling me that, hey, if you don't earn another $10,000 this month, then everything's going to really fall to shit, and you better start getting some anxiety or whatever the thought is. As soon as I come back into into reality, into my consciousness, and say, hey, that's not me making that thought. I'm listening to that thought. Here comes ego again. Immediately that thought is forgiven. Immediately I'm forgiven by myself, and I can alleviate or I can elevate past that and above that and move past that. Okay. And those thoughts become less and less, and you become less and less troubled by them. Now, it's not just a psychology where you have a psychosis, though, and this is what I want to get into, is sort of the dynamics of how the ego works and what it manifests in your life, because it doesn't just cause psychosis or dementia or anything like that, inconfidence. It does cause that, but it will actually manifest things in your life if you're not cognizant of it. And the biggest way it does that is through projection. Another word that we use all the time. We constantly say, you're projecting on me, whatever the case may be. And so it's important that we know what we're talking about and how that relates to the ego. Best way to think about projection is always in terms of girlfriend and boyfriend and married couples, because they are trying to understand each other and become one. And so this concept of projection comes up a lot. And essentially, if you've never really used this term, what you're saying when you say you're projecting on someone is that person that you're projecting on is really not manifesting or showing any characteristics of what you are getting mad at them for, but that you are putting those characteristics in them. And that happens two ways, okay? One way it happens is if you're very critical of yourself about something and you've been dwelling on something, then at some point you're going to come to the point where because you don't want to self-inflict, it's hard for you to be objective on yourself. You will put those characteristics in someone that you can yell at and get away with it, which is usually a loved one. And you start yelling, and later on, after you've blown up on this person, you may come to a point and realize, you know what, you don't do that. That is not your characteristic. That's my characteristic. I'm mad at myself for doing that. I'm putting that in you. You're usually not late to work. I'm the one that's late to work. I'm saying you're irresponsible because I don't want to hurt myself. I want to put it on you. So that's one way. Is when you're overly critical of yourself, you'll put it onto other people so that you can basically punish yourself through them vicariously. The second way that you see projection happen a lot of times is just through expectation. This is what I see most through relationships of married people or girlfriend and boyfriend or whatever the case may be, where you just get used to someone, and so you start expecting a certain result from that person. This certain type of situation, or you acting a certain way or spending a certain amount of money, you expect a certain result from that person. Anger, acting like an ass, whatever the case may be. And you expect it so much that you actually pull that from the ego of that other person. Because again, you have to remember, you're not the only one walking around with this ego. From now on, you should be the only one conscious of it, because very few to none are. And that gives you the advantage to be a leader in every situation, knowing that all the anxiety that everyone is suffering from is an illusion, but you can recognize it and they can't, okay? But if you expect these things out of people, then their egos are triggered and they will give you what you want, basically. And so that is an actual dynamic that is happening in reality, where you're getting what you expect. And so you have to recondition your mind, Okay? And I think this is your greatest challenge in life. And if you really want to open up the doors in your life to abundance and peace and miracles, this is the challenge you want to think about. Every person you meet in your life and every situation that you're in, stop judging it on the past. The past has nothing to do with right now, and that is the only thing that you're judging these things on, because that's the only thing you have to base it on, is what you experienced in the past. Wash away your expectations and meet every single person, whether you know them or not, whether they're a stranger or your wife that you've been married to for 10 years, okay? Meet every occurrence and person with a fresh state, no expectations, and search for God in that person. Search for Christ in that person. Search for the inner light. Search for consciousness. Search for love, whatever it is for you, okay? Don't expect that bum to be annoying. Don't expect your boss to come at you in a terrible way, okay? When he comes into your door, start listening. I know it's hard because he's an asshole probably, but figure out what God's trying to say in there. It's not always exactly what the words are. It's more about the aura of what's coming through him. And realize that he's just trying to do the best from his level of consciousness, and feel empathy for him and for every situation. And if you can find that light in every person, if you can find, and I'm just going to use the word, if you can go and seek Christ in every person you meet, instead of expecting the worst out of every person you meet and every situation you're in, amazing things will start opening up for you. Resistance will go away.